Let go of me. I have children waiting for me at home.
You should have minded your business, teacher.
My students know where I go every evening. They will notice I did not come home.
By the time anyone notices, it will be too late.
Touch one hair on that child's head and you will answer to this whole community.
Drive.
The chalk snapped in Patience's hand the moment she heard the gate slam outside her classroom. She did not stop writing on the board. She knew that sound. It was the sound of a father coming to take a child out of school forever. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, turning slowly, "Mr. Ifeong, is everything well?" The man standing in her doorway would not look at her directly. His hands trembled as he held a folded paper, the kind of paper that carried bad news inside it. Mr. Ifeong, the thin man in a worn brown shirt, said, voice low, "I have come for Comfort. She will not be returning to this school." The classroom of 30 children went silent. Comfort, sitting in the front row with her notebook still open to an unfinished arithmetic problem, lowered her head as if she already knew what was coming. She was 14 years old and the brightest mind Patient had taught in 11 years of teaching in that small Port Harcourt school built from cement blocks and zinc roofing that leaked every rainy season. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper said, stepping closer, "She has an examination in 3 weeks. She cannot leave now." Mr. Ifeong, the thin man in a worn brown shirt, said, crumpling the paper in his fist, "You do not understand what is happening in my house, madam. Men have come to my compound twice this week. They say if they do not pay what I owe, they will take more than money from me." The whole school had heard whispers about Mr. Ifeong's cobbles. He had borrowed money from men who did not lend with kindness, men who collected debts with threats, and sometimes with violence. Now he had found a way to settle part of what he owed. A wealthy trader's son had offered a bride price for Comfort, more money than Mr. Ifeong could earn in 2 years of selling firewood by the roadside. Walking Comfort home that evening, Patience, her wrapper dragging through the red dust of the narrow street, her mind working faster than her feet. She had seen this story in other villages, other families crushed by debt, other daughters sacrificed to settle what their fathers owed, but she had never let it happen to one of her own students, not while she still had breath in her body. Inside the small room that served as both kitchen and parlor, Mr. Ifeong sat with his head in his hands, while his wife wept quietly in the corner, rocking an infant who did not understand why everyone around her was crying. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, kneeling beside him, "How much do you owe these men?" Mr. Ifeong, the thin man in a worn brown shirt, said, not lifting his head, 250,000 naira. I borrowed it when my wife was sick. I have already paid back almost half, but the interest grows faster than I can climb out of it. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, steady. Give me 3 weeks. Do not sign anything. Do not let that trader's son come near this house. Mr. Ifeong, the thin man in a worn brown shirt, said, finally looking up, Madam, you are a teacher. You do not have that kind of money. He was right. Patient earned a teacher's salary that barely carried her through each month, paying for her own small rented room and sending something home to her aging mother in the village. But she had something else, a small gold chain and a pair of earrings that belonged to her mother before her, kept wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her box, untouched for 15 years because she could never bring herself to part with the last pieces of her mother's presents. That night, she sat alone under a dim lantern, turning the jewelry over in her fingers, remembering her mother's voice telling her that gold was for hard times, not for decoration. She thought of Conflex Hands always raising first to answer a question, always staying behind after class to ask for one more lesson before walking the long road home. She thought of what the girl could become if given the chance. A nurse, a teacher herself, anything but a child bride traded away to quiet a death that was never hers to carry. By morning, Patient had sold the jewelry to a goldsmith near the market, taking less than its true worth because she needed cash quickly and could not wait for a fair price. She added it to 3 months of salary she had saved for a roof repair she now would not be making, and 2 private tutoring fees she collected from a neighbor's children. It still wasn't enough. She took on a third job grading papers for a secondary school across town in the evenings, walking home each night exhausted but resolute. The grading job across town tested every limit of her body. She left her own classroom each afternoon, hurried through traffic on a rickety bus that smelled of diesel and overripe oranges, and sat for 3 hours marking another school's examination papers under a flickering fluorescent light. Her eyes burned by the time she returned to her rented room each night, but she could not stop, because every naira mattered now, and every naira brought comfort one step further from the trader's son who had already begun sending messengers to Mr. Ifeong's house, demanding to know when the marriage arrangement would be finalized. One evening, a neighbor, Mama Ngozi, who sold pepper soup outside the compound gate, stopped Patience as she returned from her third job, concern written across her face. Mama Ngozi, the older woman with a head wrap and an apron, said, shaking her head, "Teacher, you are wearing yourself thin for another woman's child. Rest small." Patience, the school teacher in a faded green wrapper, said, managing a tired smile, "If I rest, that child becomes somebody's property by Friday. I cannot rest yet." Mama Ngozi pressed a wrapped bundle of food into her hands without another word, the kind of silent support that asks for nothing in return. And Patience carried it home grateful for even that small kindness in a week that had given her very little rest. Within 2 weeks, Patience had gathered 180,000 naira. She went to the men herself, refusing to let Mr. Ifeong face them alone, standing in front of a roadside provision shop where the debt collectors conducted their business in the open, daring anyone passing to question them. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, placing the money firmly on the table, "This is most of what is owed. Give us until the end of the month for the rest." The lead collector, a heavy-set man with a scar above his eyebrow, looked at her with something between amusement and warning. The collector, the heavy-set man with a scar above his eyebrow, said, counting the money slowly, "Teacher, you should mind your business. This man's debt is not your debt." Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, not backing away, "Her daughter's future is my business. I teach her. I will not watch her sold like she has no name of her own." Word of her defiance spread through the neighborhood faster than she expected, and not everyone admired her for it. The collectors did not appreciate being challenged in front of onlookers, and 3 nights later, as Patience walked home from her evening tutoring job, a car slowed beside her on the dark stretch of road near the railway crossing. 2 men stepped out before she could run, pulling her into the vehicle, while her market bag spilled tomatoes and bread across the gutter. They held her in an empty storage building behind a closed petrol station, not harming her, but making clear through their silence and the way they paced that this was meant to frighten her into surrendering the rest of Mr. Ifeong's debt, or worse, into abandoning him altogether. Patience, the school teacher, in a faded green wrapper, said, voice shaking but controlled, "My students know where I go every evening. They will notice I did not come home." She was right. Comfort, waiting by the roadside as she always did to greet her teacher home, ran when Patience did not appear at her usual hour. The girl gathered her classmates and ran from house to house through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, telling anyone who would listen that their teacher was missing. Word reached the Okada riders who knew every road in the area, and within an hour, a crowd of parents, students, and market women had assembled, demanding answers from anyone connected to the debt collectors. By the time the police arrived at the storage building, alerted by a tip from a frightened shopkeeper who had seen the men drag Patience inside, a crowd had gathered outside, chanting her name, refusing to disperse until she was found. The collectors, faced with too many witnesses and too much noise to silence, released her unharmed just before officers broke down the door. Patience walked out into the gathered crowd to find Comfort sobbing with relief, clutching her teacher's torn wrapper as if she would never let go again. Comfort, the young girl with neat-plaited hair, said, crying, "I thought they had taken you because of me." Patience, the school teacher in a faded green wrapper, said, holding her close, "Nobody takes me without a fight, my dear, and nobody takes your future either." The incident reached the ears of a local councilman who long resented the debt collectors operating without restraint in his ward. With public attention finally on the matter, he ordered an investigation into their lending practices, uncovering a pattern of illegal interest rates and intimidation that had tracked dozens of families across the community, not only Mr. Ifeong's. Bank records and witness statements gathered over the next few weeks showed the same group had cornered at least 11 other households into debts that doubled and tripled within months, each family too afraid to speak until Patience's ordeal gave them the courage to come forward. The lead collector and 2 of his men were arrested, and a court ruling cancelled what remained of Mr. Effiong's debt entirely, declaring the original loan terms unlawful. The presiding magistrate, reading the judgment aloud to a courtroom packed with the very families who had once suffered in silence, noted that it was the determination of one school teacher refusing to look away that had finally exposed what years of quiet suffering had failed to bring to light. Mr. Effiong, the thin man in a worn brown shirt, said, kneeling before Patience, "You gave more than money. You gave her a life I almost gave away." Patience, the school teacher in a faded green wrapper, said, helping him to his feet, "Then promise me you will let her finish what she started." Comfort finished her examinations that term with the highest marks in her class and continued through secondary school on a scholarship Patience helped her secure through a former university classmate who now worked at an education foundation. The collectors who had once terrorized the community spent years facing court proceedings. Their once feared names now spoken with contempt rather than fear. The very debt they had used to control families becoming the evidence that unraveled their operation completely. 9 years later, a young doctor in a white coat walked back into the same small schoolyard, now repainted and fitted with a new roof, funded partly by donations that had poured in after Patient's story spread through the community. The mango tree still stood at the center of the compound, though it had grown taller, its branches now shading a row of new benches donated by the same councilman who had once ordered the investigation that freed her father from his debt. She found her old teacher grading papers under that same tree where she had once explained fractions to a girl who refused to be married away before she had the chance to learn them. Dr. Comfort, the young woman in a white coat, said, smiling through tears, "You said nobody takes my future. You are right. I came back to bring you mine instead." Patience looked up at the woman standing before her, seeing not the frightened 14-year-old who once lowered her head in fear, but a future the whole community now pointed to with pride. Proof that one teacher's refusal to give up outlasted every man who tried to buy a child's life away with a debt that was never hers to pay. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.